Are you okay?
No. No, I'm not.
You seem pretty out of it.
Yeah.
Danganronpa.
Hello, my friends. It is my solemn duty to inform you that we now live in a horrifying new reality. So if you're not aware of this fact, on the morning of this past Friday, September 12th, during the Nintendo Direct, there was a teaser trailer announcing a new Danganronpa game, and that is Danganronpa 2x2. Now, if you're wondering what Danganronpa 2x2 is, it is a from-the-ground-up remake of Super Danganronpa 2, the original game. But in addition to being a remake of Danganronpa 2, it also will contain a secondary brand new scenario which diverges from the original game's plot and features new deaths, new culprits, new tricks, all kinds of stuff. As funny as it is to joke about, oh god, more Danganronpa, I do genuinely think that that's actually kind of a compelling idea, theoretically. But obviously, with any game announcement, especially in a series which has kind of definitively ended itself, there's gonna be a lot of discussion surrounding it, a lot of different and mixed opinions on the whole ordeal. And of course, since I kind of came into slight prominence as a result of making big, long Danganronpa related videos, I decided that it would probably be a good idea to actually go ahead and talk about this new announcement and the teaser and all of that stuff, and just generally give my impressions and thoughts on everything, maybe some predictions and stuff. I of course think I'm going to end up making a video about it at some point when it does come out, but I just wanted to go ahead and get ahead of that now and talk about my current thoughts on it, and hopefully this will serve as an interesting time capsule once the actual final release does come out, to compare and contrast what I think now as opposed to what ends up happening in the future. So first, before any other observations, we're gonna go ahead and watch the actual two teasers that were released, one during the Direct and one by Spike themselves, and we're just going to give a few little live impressions while we go. So let's go ahead and start this up.
Ready for some killer fun in the sun?
Oh boy. It's such a funny, like, narration to start off with, like the cheery killer. Hello, Komaida.
Are you okay?
No. No, I'm
You
not.
seem pretty out of it.
Yeah.
Originally released over 10 years ago,
God, has it been that long?
2 Goodbye Despair is making the ultimate
The
comeback.
tween.
While on a school trip to Jabberwock,
We're gonna talk about that.
you and your classmates are trapped in a murderous game. After each deadly incident, a heated class trial will begin. In high-speed detective action, you'll shoot down contradictions and counter
I have a note
to
here,
reveal the
too.
truth. And
Okay, yeah, here's the interesting part.
along with the main game,
That is-
an additional story
That's
is
an interesting
included.
map, by the
One
way.
incident will trigger an entirely new scenario with different victims and culprits.
I do wonder about what that incident will be and how early on it is.
The next class trial is about to begin!
Danganronpa 2x2.
Is that a new
launches
voice
on the
line?
Nintendo
I don't
Switch
know.
2 and Nintendo Switch systems next year.
Danganronpa.
So, new remix here, which I really like. The original CGs, by the way, which I think is interesting. I wonder if that'll be adjusted later. God, the guitar is so good.
The wait is over!
Yeah, I definitely feel like that's a new Brian Beacock line. Okay, yeah, so those were the trailers. Before we get into sort of the granular picking through stuff from the trailer, I would also like to look at this website real quick and sort of go through like the staff listings and stuff like that, because we have some things to discuss with that as well. This is the latest installment in the high-speed detective action Danganronpa series. Reveal the truth by shooting down contradictions in a class trial and uncover the culprit of a murder. Yeah, basic enough. A new killing game begins in the same setting and with the same characters as Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair. The original scenario from Goodbye Despair, with revamped visuals and presentation for modern consoles, is also included. We have some screenshots here with Monokuma and Monomi. We got a better look at the Gundam one there. the better look at Koizumi there, and the Sore wa chigau yo. A brand new scenario with different victims, culprits, and tricks. This new scenario contains just as much gameplay as the original, which, by the way, that is kind of crazy. That's a lot of content. Like, that's actually a really chunky story. I do wonder about that. That's very interesting. All we got for release date so far is 2026. Okay, so now we've gotten to the staff section, and I do want to talk a little bit about this. So planning and production is being done by Spike Chunsoft, but the actual developer is Gemdrops Inc., which I had never heard of before now, but I did do a little bit of looking. If you look at their Steam developer page, their most recent stuff, they did a Hanafuda game for HoloLive, which is interesting. Pico Part 2, which I've never heard of. They did a Star Ocean game, which is, you know, okay. They did a Kizuna Eye game, and then a couple of Laid Back Camp VR games. So definitely not the library that I would expect from somebody developing a Danganronpa game, to be completely honest. But at the same time, I mean, like, from what I can see in the trailer, everything looks relatively competently done, so I wouldn't exactly say that that's like a huge concern to me right now. I mean, I'm sure that they've probably got it handled. We've got Kodaka on supervision, but he is not the main scenario writer, which is definitely interesting, and we're going to touch a little bit more on that when we actually get to the main scenario writer. We have concept and trick ideas by Takekuni Kitayama. If you're not familiar with Kitayama, he was the co-writer of Danganronpa V3. He also wrote the Danganronpa Kirigiri light novels and the sound novel Kirigiri So. He's sort of well known for doing a lot of like impossible murder mystery tricks, which is, I think, encouraging. Considering that he wrote all of the tricks for V3 in particular, I think that that also is pretty encouraging. That kind of says to me, like, they have a guy that sort of knows what he's doing when it comes to writing interesting mysteries. I think one of the things that is easily criticizable about Danganronpa as a series, at least when you go further back, is that despite the fact that I really like the story and the characters, I wouldn't say that any of the mysteries themselves in definitely Danganronpa 1 are like particularly incredible in terms of like their construction or like just generally, like I would say they are very basic mysteries. And then you get to Super Danganronpa 2, which definitely does a lot more with them, but until like chapter 4 or 5, I would still say that they're still relatively simple, all things considered. And then V3 is where you really start getting into some more creative ones. Sans like chapter 3 of V3, I would say that those are generally pretty well considered. So I would say that having Kitayama on Trick Ideas is actually a very encouraging sign for the quality of the new narrative. Now, where we get into a little bit of a complicated thing, we have scenario writer Yoichiro Koizumi. Now, if you're not familiar with Yoichiro Koizumi, he has worked on other Kodaka joints in the past. He is responsible for the romance and conspiracy route in 100 Line. Those are not necessarily the most well-liked of the 100 Line routes, I would say. But, I mean, he was also an assistant writer on AI The Somnium Files, which, I mean, you know, I would say that that's generally slightly more encouraging. But he also did some sub-scenarios on Raincode, which I know that there are a lot of people that have complicated feelings about that game. I still haven't played it personally, but you know, take what you will from that. I think the thing that's definitely going to get a lot of people raising a bit more of an eyebrow at his tenure, though, is the fact that he was an assistant writer on Ultra Despair Girls, as well as being the sole author of Ultra Despair Hagakure. And Ultra Despair Hagakure is not what I would call a well-liked piece of media in the fandom. I think that there are definitely fans of it out there, and it's been long enough since I've read it that I wouldn't exactly go on record saying I have a particularly strong opinion about it. But at the same time, I mean, you know, it does have Canon in it, and Canon is a character that people definitely have some very particular opinions about. Yeah, it's just one of those things that definitely stirs up some immediate impressions, which do leave me a little bit more nervous about the game's writing quality. Then obviously we have Takada back on music, along with a Tokyo Games sound person, Jun Fukuda, and Komatsuzaki back on design as well. And yeah, coming soon. Okay, so I think now would be a good time to sort of go through the trailer and sort of like talk about the smaller details that do kind of stick out to me and generally what I think about those. First thing that I would like to go into is actually the fact that these CGs appear to be basically the same from the original game. I do kind of wonder if there will be any attempt at touching those up or doing anything to sort of make them a little bit more like the rest of the game's art style. Because if you've noticed, the art style of this new iteration of the game is definitely different. It's a little bit sleeker, it's a little bit more, I don't want to say V3-esque, but you know what I mean. So having these original CGs that more or less look completely identical to the PSP version of the game from all the way back when does strike me as maybe a little strange. I like the art in the original games. I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, it's outdated, you need to replace it or whatever. But I just think that if it's in terms of like, I don't know, making the actual art style of the whole game feel like it meshes together, I think that maybe that's something that could be worked with a little bit, but I don't know, that's just my initial takeaway. We should also talk about the backgrounds. So one of the things that's very interesting about Danganronpa is this sort of pop-up style that is always done in these environments. And it does look as though they are sort of mimicking that, like the original games. The way it like all comes into the space definitely mimics that in terms of how it looks originally. But I have to say, I'm not entirely sold on how this looks. Like, if we look at the original Usami Corral background here from the original game, I don't know, there's a very cartoony quality about it. It's very, like, almost clip arty in some ways. Obviously it is much lower resolution because it is a PSP game from all the way back in the day. But when you compare it to the way it looks in the new trailer, yeah, it's a lot more detailed, but I feel like there's so much like little things like just kind of missing from the general vibe of it. For starters, it's definitely not nearly as like cartoony looking. I know obviously they're trying to do a little bit more of a photorealistic approach, I guess, but I mean, you don't have the cow, you don't have the bird, you know, some like you don't have the drippy text. There's a lot about this that just seems very, I don't want to sound mean, but it's very like Spike Chunsoft hire this man. It's very like, what if we made Danganronpa in Unreal Engine 4 kind of looking, you know? I just think that while I do like that they are trying to kind of keep that pop art sort of like influence in the way that it is transitioned into, I feel like the rest of the art direction doesn't really match that. I feel like it's a little bit too photorealistic, and that kind of clashes with the art direction of that pop-up book style. I think when you have a cartoonier style, a little bit more of a simplistic style, it accommodates that very well because it looks a little bit more fitting. When you have these sort of like more like vivid color kind of environments that focus on a lot of detail, it starts to look a little bit more unnatural, if that makes sense. So, I don't know, I don't mean to be like a nitpicker about this, even though I am being. But I think that this is a design decision that kind of has a little bit of conflict going on. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I might have to see more environments from the rest of the game to kind of make up my mind. It's one that I'm kind of putting an asterisk by right now. Speaking of things that are a little off, we have to talk about the sprites, particularly the tweening. This like little like, they're doing little bits of like additional animation for these sprites, which were originally static. And I think that's a cool thing to do. I actually quite like that conceptually, but something about this is off to me, in that I wish that there was a little bit more going on. Like, you see the scarf moving, but then it's just very like still and static once it stops moving. You have like a little bit of eye and mouth movement from Gundam here, but it stops dead. It like freezes as soon as he's done. It just like, it stops. Like again, I'm gonna play it here. You can see the movement and then he just freezes like this. And then it's just like that. And I feel like if there were a little bit more of a like idle pose quality to these sprites where they like maybe continued blinking, or like the clothing, like especially like something like the scarf kind of keeps flowing a little bit or whatever, that would be maybe preferable. Obviously, what we're seeing here is kind of like alpha footage anyway. I think there's definitely time to tweak some of these things before the game's release, but that's something that definitely sticks out to me. I don't think it looks as bad in every sprite. For example, we have here, you can't really see the animation on these very well. There's the Gundam one. Okay, yeah. So we only get a very brief glimpse of this Komaeda one, but the Komaeda one actually doesn't like bother me as much. Maybe because his eyes are already closed, so you don't really have to worry about animating them that much. But like the little like hand wave movement, it's like, it's just subtle enough that it kind of like adds a little bit of a dynamicism to the sprite, but it doesn't like overdo it. I think part of my issue with the Gundam one is that if it's going to be this animated, because look at this, I mean, like he moves a lot. Like that's a lot of movement. I feel like if he's gonna be moving this much, you kind of necessarily have to add a little bit more to it so that it doesn't look unnatural. And I think that's kind of what's throwing me off about this one, as opposed to the Komaeda one, which is just a little bit more subtle in its movements, and I think I kind of prefer that a little bit. Like, I'm sorry, the Gundam one kind of makes me just, like, think of, like, really weird, like, TikTok, like, AI edits, if you know what I mean, of, like, people taking, like, static fan art and then just, like, using AI to animate it, and it just, like, looks weird. That's kind of what it reminds me of. Not saying that this is AI, by the way. That's not what I'm implying at all. I'm totally sure that it's being done by human people. I'm just saying that that's kind of what it reminds me of stylistically a little bit. And while we're criticizing visual elements here, I guess I might as well also mention that the UI is not necessarily my favorite either. I think that you could do a lot of creative things with the UI, and I think maybe taking more like UI cues from, say, like V3 would have been an interesting idea, especially with the protagonist cut-in portraits. I think that would have been a fun thing to do, but as it is, it's just kind of like, oh, it's a box. Okay. The music player also just kind of being a generic box is not my favorite either. I think it's just, it lacks a lot of personality compared to the original UI. I know the original UI is a little boxed in and a little almost Winamp looking. It's very like old school media player looking, but I like that about it. It's got a certain charm to it. I think it definitely looks better on a PSP screen than it does on a larger game screen, so I understand why they would try to go for something a little bit more minimalistic, a little bit more sleek. But this, I think, aside from the name fonts, which I think are fun, I think that there's just more you could be doing with this. Maybe it is a little bit more computer-esque because, hey, it's the Neo World program, but I don't know. I feel like you could be doing more with it. And then finally, the last visual element that I want to complain about. It's gonna sound like I fucking hate this announcement, by the way. I want to be clear. I don't. I'm actually like very interested in this. I'm just like mega invested in a lot of like tiny meaningless bullshit, and if I don't talk about it, my brain will explode. So you have to endure the brunt of that. I apologize. Anyway, last little thing I want to complain about is that Koizumi doesn't have freckles. Where are her freckles? Why is she freckleless? Maybe it's just like the high contrast in this image or in this part or whatever with like the lighting. Maybe that's just kind of obscuring the view of it a little bit, but like it really does just look like she doesn't have freckles, and that bothers me. I hope she retains her freckles. We must not revise history like this for the worst. I don't think I really have that much more to say about the trailer itself. There is the new map screen, which is not like the 2D map screen where Hinata's doing the quap walk. It's just, you know, a 3D environment. I personally think this does look a little bit more boring personally, but also at the same time I like understand why they would want to do something that's maybe a little bit more in-depth looking. So I don't really actually have many complaints about this. I do think it is kind of interesting. Let me just turn off my model view for a second. I do think it is actually very interesting that the Usami Corral is represented by the cow on the screen, even though we didn't see the cow on the background. But generally, yeah, I don't really have much to say about that. Okay, so now that we're done with the nitpicking, I would like to go through some sort of speculative beats and kind of talk about my expectations for the game, what could possibly happen with it, generally just some ideas like that. So first of all, I would like to talk about the subject of the protagonist role, because I feel like one of the most obvious theories that somebody could make about how you could revise the story of Danganronpa 2 and take it in a new direction, especially because it says something about one particular incident skewing things in a different direction. I think if you're going to skew things in a different direction, you kind of have to do it around like the chapter 1 murder, maybe? Something like that. Which leads me to one of the more common theories I see being tossed around, and something that I think is probably kind of likely. The idea that possibly Hinata or Komaeda or both could die. And now I know that we do have the new CG of them, and I'll address some stuff related to that later as well. But there are like definitely ways that you could explain this or do something with this, so I don't think that that necessarily removes from the table the possibility that either Hinata or Komaeda die. In particular, I think it would be really interesting if you did something where basically instead of Teru and Imposter being able to stop Komaeda from his plan of killing someone at the party in chapter 1, maybe he actually succeeds at his plan to kill somebody. And I mean, hey, he could end up killing Hinata. Who knows? I think that one of them at least is definitely not making it out. I don't know if I believe that both of them die, but I feel like one of them dies at least. They're just too, like, central to the original game, and I feel like a lot of this will sort of focus on doing other things and exploring other possibilities that maybe were not explored as heavily in the original version of the game. So killing off Hinata or Komaeda definitely frees up room to have, like, some more survivors or more, like, angles that you wouldn't have had otherwise. Now, that being said, if Komaeda and Hinata both die, I think we all know what that might lead to, and I just want to go ahead and get it out of the way. If we get Nanami protagonist, I think that actually could be really fascinating. Because genuinely, as much as I did like her narrative in DR2, I think one of my standing criticisms of the original DR2 is I just felt like I wished I got a little bit more out of Nanami. I wished that there was a little bit more character development for her that sort of like led to me caring more about her when it came to like her death later on in the game. So I think doing something where you actually develop her more as a main character could actually be really good, but that remains to be seen, obviously. Speaking of Nanami and her potential in this game's story, I think obviously also there is kind of the underlying notion that, hey, maybe we might get some actual tie-in stuff to stuff from Danganronpa 3, the anime. And to be completely honest, I think that, like, while I'm not necessarily... I mean, you guys know that I am not really a fan of the story elements in Danganronpa 3. I have made this pretty abundantly clear over time. But while that is the case, I do feel like there is possibly some potential to sort of interweave some of those things a little bit more into the actual narrative of 2 in a way that could potentially make them more interesting than I found them to be initially. I mean, if you were to take some of the plot elements of that series that I wasn't maybe such a fan of, but do something with them in a way that made them seem a little bit more natural and kind of like gave them a little bit more emotional context and build-up in this new version of the narrative, I think that that actually could be a really interesting idea to explore. I'm not saying that they would do that, but I'm just saying it is an interesting possibility. But on the other hand, I think that there's just as high of a likelihood, well, maybe not as high of a likelihood. I don't know what's likely or not. We are literally speculating from these tiny, tiny ass teasers and the fact that this is going to have a different story. We literally don't know anything about this game at this point. But that being said, I think there is a possibility, or at least it would be kind of an interesting possibility, if we tied this into V3 a little bit more. Obviously, V3 had quite the controversial pivot in terms of its world building and its sort of alternate universe view of the Danganronpa franchise. I think tying into that and going in maybe slightly more of a meta angle, perhaps, could be interesting. I mean, the title of the game is literally Danganronpa 2x2, and 2 times 2 equals 4. This is something that a lot of people have been pointing out as well. Considering that we have this shot of Komaeda and Hinata looking down at the boat, I definitely think there is something going on with that. It doesn't escape me, by the way, that you can't see Hinata's eyes and you can't see Komaeda's hands. Actually, come to think of it, one thing that definitely does stick out to me here too is that right before this part in the trailer, you actually see this shot with Komaeda standing outside of the boathouse. And it does say Chapter 1, at night. It does lead me to kind of believe that maybe there's a possibility that Hinata could catch on to Komaeda's plan early and kind of shut it down, or I don't know, something going on with that. And then it leads into this, maybe, somehow? You have that, yeah, looks like we can get down from here. I don't know. Again, we know nothing about this at this point. Anyway, I think the V3 stuff is like more of a bit of a pipe dream, or like a little bit more of a stretch kind of thing. But the reason I bring it up is just because part of the reason why I think this remake even exists in the first place is because, and they've been surprisingly patient about doing this, but I think Danganronpa is just too big for Spike Chunsoft to leave it dead forever. Kodaka obviously ended the series off with V3 in a way that felt very pointed in the way that he desired to end it, but it's one of those properties that, like, yeah, it's too successful. I don't think that the parent company that owns it is going to let it be stagnant forever, so they were always going to do something like this eventually. So I think if they were to do something to kind of, like, splinter the timeline, so to speak, maybe do something like this where the outcome of this Super Danganronpa 2 leads off in a slightly different direction. They could maybe, do an alternate branching timeline from there, and then do a whole new thing, and then that would lead to an excuse for them to make more Danganronpa sequels without Kodaka. That's kind of my prediction for that. I don't really know if that's accurate, but it's just kind of a thing that I'm thinking about, kind of mulling on. A lot of people are saying, why didn't they do this for the first game? And I think, honestly, the reason for that is quite simple. I think it's just because Danganronpa 2 is the only one where you can do this and more or less escape huge narrative consequences for it. Like, Danganronpa 1, if you don't have that game go the way it does, so many things from that point onward literally do not work anymore. Like, so much of that game's story has to be the way that it is so that the rest of the series can actually work. Danganronpa 2, because of the fact that it takes place in the Neo World program, and all of the characters technically don't die, and there's left open the possibility that they'll all wake up, and then, of course, in Hope Arc in Danganronpa 3, they all do. It more or less is one of those things where I feel like, theoretically, you could go in this different story direction and have it still work, quote-unquote. Like, it more or less, the status quo can actually be maintained rather well. I don't really know how I feel about that in terms of this new story and its thematic goals and aims and all that stuff. I think you should strike out and do something crazy with it a little bit more because, I don't know, if you don't, then, like, what's the reason to make a new story like that in the first place? It feels a little bit phoned in at that point. I do hope they do something a little crazy and weird with it, but that's just me. That being said, now I just want to get into a couple of, like, more, like, scattered thoughts, maybe about, like, some of the characters and some of the potential for that. First of all, I do want to address the matter of voice cast as well. I do wonder if for the new material we are going to have the original cast from both language versions return. Obviously, there is a bit of a big asterisk on the Japanese version, and I'll get to that in a second. For the English cast, I think that most people would probably be able to come back. I know that the original game dubs were done non-union, so I don't know if this would be a similar case, if you would have more like uncredited actors or like people that weren't able to come back for reasons like that. Obviously, voice acting, when it comes to things like that, can be a little bit complicated. There are a lot of actors in this industry that just don't do things in a certain way because of that. I do wonder if some of the bigger names that they have in the cast would be a bit more of a tough sell now, especially if this is being made by a smaller developer. Like, I don't know, are they going to get Johnny Young Bosch back? I don't know. As far as the Japanese version is concerned, I think that I more or less expect everybody to come back. That's just kind of a thing for a lot of properties in Japan. If the voice actors are still active and they were originally cast for a role, barring, death or a huge controversy, most of the time the cast will remain pretty much identical throughout all of the entries that they're feasibly able to do. The only glaring omission that there will be, obviously, is Nobuyo Oyama as Monokuma, because obviously Miss Oyama passed away a while ago. But then there's also the fact that they don't have Tarako, who voiced Monokuma in Danganronpa 3 and V3 as well, because she has also passed away since then. And it just begs the question of like, okay, well, if they're gonna do new stuff with this new story campaign, are they going to recast Monokuma again? And if so, I'm very curious as to who they would have take up the role. Just something to think about. Okay, now I want to get into some sort of like victim and culprit speculations and like maybe some story arc stuff. So bear with me as I kind of go character by character. A lot of these predictions are kind of gonna boil down to, well, this character didn't die in the original game, so I bet they're gonna die here. I feel like there are probably more interesting ways you could approach this, and I hope that they don't fully stick to that blueprint, because I feel like it would end up becoming rather predictable as a result if that's the case. I feel like there are some people who die in the vanilla game that should still probably end up dying here. Like, they can have more character development and more stuff to do and, like, go in different directions from the original story, but I still think that there are definitely situations where, like, these characters are not, like, endgame survivor material. But I don't know, it's hard to say at this point. I mean, like, obviously it could go anywhere. Sonya is a character that I'm not really sure if she's gonna make it out. I mean, I feel like she could definitely have more to do, but overall, I mean, she's a survivor in the original game, and I feel like, I don't know, I just don't feel like I reckon they're gonna do much with Sonya. Teru, I don't know. I mean, there is a possibility that he could make it. I don't know how I feel about that possibility. I think that there is potentially maybe an interesting thing you could do where, like, maybe he did try to kill Komaeda, and then he failed or something. Maybe he faces a bit of ostracization for the group and is kind of forced to develop more as a character. That could be interesting. Also, I mean, there's definitely the fact that, like, it would be interesting to see his reaction to the endgame stuff, considering, the whole plotline with his mom and everything. Kuzuryu is a character that I feel like we've gotten a lot of development for. I kind of can't foresee us retreading a lot of his character in that way. I feel like, as much as I love my boy, I could definitely see him being somebody that ends up dying. Kazuichi Soda, I've seen a lot of people saying, oh my god, finally Soda will die. And I feel like there's only one of two possible options here. Either he is completely just obliterated, like no shot, just like completely inconsequential death, or for some reason he pulls the double survivor victory and like ends up doing something insanely important. 100% Kazuichi victory. Mikan. I'm a little split on Mikan. I think it would be interesting to keep her alive, especially because Mikan is one of the more, let's say, controversial characters of the original game, but one that is still generally well loved by a lot of people. This ties into another fact, which I'm just gonna go ahead and talk about her as well. I think we definitely need Survivor Saionji. And the reason for that is because the blueprint for it is already baked into the vanilla game. There was already kind of a groundwork laid for the potential of Saionji having a character arc where she grows as a person and learns from her mistakes, with the death of Koizumi. And then, of course, it was kind of shuffled around to make room for a character arc for Kazuryu instead. And then she just kind of gets killed in Chapter 3. I think that if we didn't revisit the idea of a Saionji character arc, it would be a big waste of potential. I genuinely think that, like, the groundwork is already so well established there that we literally have no excuse not to pursue it. If we're doing an alternate version of the SDR2 story, I feel like if we didn't do that, then it would kind of beg the question of, like, what are we doing here at all? So that being said, if Mikan is a survivor as well, I think you could really do some interesting development with those two characters, considering obviously their dynamic in the original game and like how much Saionji like bullies the shit out of Mikan. I think you could really do some interesting stuff with that. Nidai, I feel like Nidai could survive, but at the same time, I don't know what they would do with him otherwise. Because Nidai is the type of guy who, like, really, unless you force him into a corner, I really can't see him being a killer. I guess he could be a victim, but I mean, like, you know, in the original game, he, like, dies twice. So I feel like doing another Nidai death it's so overkill, man. But at the same time, I don't really know what you would do with him otherwise. Because I feel like I like Nidai, but I don't feel like there's a whole well of untapped potential in terms of Nidai character arc. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll prove me wrong. Nidai is an outlier. I'm not really sure what they'll do with him. Owari, I think, could definitely do with a lot more characterization and just general growth, but at the same time, I'm not sure if I foresee her as a survivor again, necessarily. She was a character that definitely needed a lot more expansion in the original game, though. I feel like regardless of whether she survives or not, if we get a little bit more dedicated time to her, I think that would be good. Hinata, coin flip on whether or not he lives. Komaeda, coin flip on whether or not he lives. I think there's also great potential for Komaeda protagonist. Obviously, I brought up the possibility of Nanami protagonist earlier, but I think Komaeda protagonist is just as, if not possibly more likely, to be completely honest. I mean, it is kind of the premier alternate possibility protagonist role, if you really stop to think about it, especially from the perspective of, you know, developers who are looking to make money based on a classic game that, you know, a lot of people have a lot of attachment to, especially in terms of its characters, especially in terms of Komaeda. Gundam has to live. Gundam has to live. One must imagine Gundam Tanaka alive. I feel like, I mean, you know, is there really any further elaboration I have to do on that? Like, you gotta let Gundam live, man. Especially because I feel like Gundam living would be such a fascinating dynamic for the ending stuff. I feel like seeing Gundam react to the ending stuff and, like, go through that thematically would be really, really interesting. He has, like, some of my favorite stuff in the original game, so I mean, like, you know, I can't not root for Survivor Gundam. I think that would be really interesting. Nanami, I've kind of already talked about the possibilities for Nanami. I think if they did a little bit more with her, especially if they did protagonist Nanami, I think it would be a really great opportunity for her character. Honestly, I would even say, yes, I'll go on the record and say this. Sue me for being a hypocrite if you want. I think if they genuinely wanted to massage the original sort of like complicated elements surrounding the whole idea of a human Nanami, like the human Nanami from DR3, if they wanted to play around with that more with this, and then lean into that with the protagonist Nanami angle and do something with that, like set a bit more of a precedent for human Nanami, do a little bit more to flesh that concept out in retrospect, and like do something interesting with AI Nanami in contrast to human Nanami, I genuinely think that it could soften me on that story point. I genuinely think that you could do something really interesting with that. There is potential there. I genuinely believe this. I don't know if they'll actually go in that direction or not, but it is something that I definitely am thinking about. I already talked about Saionji. Mahiru, I'm not sure about Mahiru, to be completely honest with you. I feel like it could go either way, but I still don't foresee her necessarily as a surviving character, especially if we're going with like the sort of limited pool of like 5-ish survivors. I feel like she'll probably get killed again, but like in a different way, obviously. Either that, or she could be a killer. Retaliatory killing, of Kuzuryu. Oh my god, can you imagine if they did something where, like, they actually did something a little bit more with, like, her relationship with Sato, and then had her sort of retaliatory killing Kuzuryu for killing Sato? Actually, I don't know. I mean, like, Koizumi is very pointed about the fact that she doesn't think killing in response to something is right in the original game, so it might be a little bit out of character for her, actually. I mean, you know, if Danganronpa has taught us anything, it's that any crime could happen with the right motive, right? I don't know. It's a possibility. I'm not entirely sure what my opinion on that is just yet. The imposter. I think there was a lot of potential for the imposter. I think you could do a lot more with the imposter, actually. Obviously, in the original game, part of the big twist is the fact that the imposter looks like Togami, and you don't know that they're an imposter at first, so then there's that shock of like, oh, this returning character from Danganronpa 1 that dies immediately in Chapter 1. Past the initial playthrough, the initial story, I think if we're gonna massage this in a slightly more meta-aware direction or whatever, I think there's no need to really repeat the imposter dying thing. So I think there's a lot more of an opportunity to actually develop the imposter as a character, perhaps as an actual de facto leader to the group. I think that would introduce a very interesting dynamic into play. I still think ultimately, if I had to guess, the imposter probably doesn't make it to the end, but I still think there's a lot more you could do with them. Peko is a character that I definitely think there is some potential to bring her into the fold of survivors, or at least let her survive longer so that she can do more. But I feel this kind of leans into the dichotomy of, oh, well, this character died in the original game, so we can't make them die this time. Oh, this time is not going to be Kuzuryu, mourning Peko's death. It's going to be Peko mourning Kuzuryu's death. Oh, no. And I mean, like, I think that's a little bit predictable. I don't think that you couldn't do that as a good storyline. I just think that, like, from the audience's perspective, that would be like, oh yeah, of course you would do that because it was the opposite way the last time. But I mean, Peko is a character that I've definitely wanted to see more development from, and I think that obviously there is a good opportunity, a prime opportunity to do something with that here. Whether or not she dies is kind of up in the air, but I do feel like I predict that Pekoyama will at least live longer this time. And then, of course, we have, last but not least, my wonderful hyperactive queen, Ibuki Miyota. Ibuki, I'm kind of split on in terms of whether or not she'll survive. I know there are a lot of people out there who really, really, really want her to survive. But I feel like the thing about Ibuki is that she is definitely sort of killed off as part of a tone shift in the game. It sort of leans in a little bit more of a dark direction once she's gone, because she's one of those goofier, more comedy relief focused characters, and once you sort of shuffle those types of players off the board, that's when it kind of starts getting into the serious stuff. That's something that happens in Danganronpa a lot. Now, that being said, I do feel like among the survivors, you do typically tend to have, like, this is the one character who's a little bit goofier. I feel like every survivor group kind of has that character, like Hagakure, or, I guess like Owari or Soda himself. I guess you don't really have that in V3, but you have so few survivors in V3 anyway. I don't know. I feel like, I guess if she were the resident silly, that Ibuki could be the one. And I mean, I would not object to it at all, especially because Ibuki's death in the original game is so sort of like sudden and very kind of like she's just shuffled out of the plot. I think giving her a little bit more to do would definitely be cool. Honestly, I would just like to see more Ibuki character development on the basis that I think it would actually be very interesting to see a little bit more, like, serious story beats from her. But, I mean, really, all of this speculation is stuff that I can't, in any regard, actually say is, like, more likely or less likely or whatever. Again, we really have not seen much of this game at all. That one CG of Hinata and Komaeda is really all we have to work with, and that could imply a lot of different things, so I don't really know what specifically to bet on with regards to this. I just want to throw out a lot of different possibilities that I could see happening, just because, I don't know, it's kind of fun to throw a bunch of darts at the dartboard and see what sticks. When this game eventually comes out, I would be very curious to see if I actually got close with any of my guesses. myriad as they have been. Overall, I think the idea of doing a Danganronpa 2 remake is I wouldn't call it the most necessary project I've ever seen, especially because it feels like this is kind of a transitionary game from being like, yep, we're gonna do all of this stuff with Kodaka, to being like, yeah, well, let Kodaka supervise. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Kodaka himself sort of took more of a detached role in this, but still supervised, because it's like, well, they're gonna do it with or without me regardless. So even though I don't really want to make more Danganronpa, like, at least I can be in the supervisor's chair, so that if they come up with a really stupid idea, I can be like, no, I don't think that's it, Chief. I think we need to veto that one, which, like, yeah, would make sense to me. Overall, though, while I do have my hesitancies with this project, whether it be between, like, visual nitpicks or more substantive things like not really being 100% confident in the tenure of the scenario writer, I do still think that approaching the game from this angle, this alternative story angle, is kind of a cool one, because one thing that we've always known from even back during the conception of the original games is there was always this idea of these potential branching story points where different events would happen, like different characters would die and stuff like that, but because they wanted to keep the stories very particular and very linear, they didn't pursue that in the original games. And now we're kind of being brought back to that possibility retroactively, and I think that is, I don't know, it's kind of cool, it's kind of neat. But overall, I am a little bit mixed on this announcement overall. I do think that there is a lot of potential for this game to be cool, but there are just a lot of little red flags that definitely do make me a little bit concerned about it. Again, I don't really mind if they lean into story elements from entries that I'm not as fond of, as long as they do them in an interesting way. In fact, I think that if they did do them in an interesting way, it could potentially, I wouldn't say it would revise my opinions of those pieces of work necessarily, but it still probably would, I don't know, smooth the wrinkles a little bit, if that makes sense, in a way that I could be a little bit more contented with. Also, we could just go the completely insane V3 tie-in route, where the Danganronpa 2 cast realized that they are fictional characters in this other world, and are like, bro, are you literally just playing with variables? Like, do you literally have nothing better to do than to rearrange us into a different torment nexus? Like, do we have to keep doing this, bro? Are you serious? I mean, I guess what I'm really saying is that they should make Super Danganronpa 2 Undertale. I guess. That is definitely an idea that I don't actually foresee happening, but hey, it would be crazy, right? Watch that be, like, the most accurate guess I have of, like, all of these. That would be really funny. Overall, Danganronpa 2x2 is something that I am cautiously optimistic for. I don't think it's, like, 100% necessary, especially because these games are pretty accessible across most platforms at this point. I don't really know that I think there was a great need to remake any of them, to be completely honest with you. But at the same time, if they're going to be doing something new and interesting with it, especially with sort of the most beloved entry in the franchise, then yeah, I mean, I'd at least be willing to hear them out and see what comes as a result of it. That's not a promise to love everything that they do. I mean, if it sucks, it sucks. I don't know what to tell them at that point. But again, I'm at least willing to see where it goes from here, and hopefully where it goes ends up being good. I don't really have much more to say about it at this point. I think I pretty much got all of my rambling out of the way. I apologize if this was a little aimless. I just felt that, like, since I hadn't commented on Danganronpa-related stuff for a while, and people would probably be curious to hear what I had to say about this, I would go ahead and chime in while the subject was still hot. Obviously, when the game does eventually drop, I will probably end up making some kind of video talking about, if not the remastered original game content, then absolutely the new campaign content. And, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say here, so I'm probably just gonna leave it there. This is just a little quickie video, by the way, so no patron roll this time. I will include the big patron roll at the end of my next video, which I am still working on currently right now. It is a video about the Anna series, so if you're into that, you should definitely give it a watch whenever it's done, because I'm really excited about some of the stuff we're doing for it, and I think it's going to turn out really cool. And hopefully I'll have some more stuff coming down the pipeline for you in the near future. Also, I'm streaming twice a week, so obviously if you haven't watched any of my streams, I would encourage you to tune in. We have a lot of fun there. It's great. And, you know, all the YouTube stuff, the like, the subscribe, the Patreon, whatever, you know. Do whatever you want. But YouTube is getting pretty tough these days, especially when it comes to the algorithm just kind of absolutely slamming marginalized creators because, well, in the times that we live in, the algorithm has decided that we don't deserve attention because our existence is too controversial or whatever. It's tough out there. It's really tough out there. I'm having a tough one with it. So any support that you show me, whether monetarily or just through sharing videos with your friends and commenting and stuff, it really does genuinely mean a lot to me. And as much as I would prefer to be able to do more than just the murder mystery visual novel content on my channel, I do still think it is a little sweet that as soon as this game announcement happened, there were people rushing to figure out what, if anything, I had to say about it. So I do really appreciate that there are people out there that are still fond enough of those Danganronpa videos that I made several years ago to be interested in hearing what I have to say about this. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I don't think there's really anything else I want to touch on. Of course, as soon as I hit end record, I'm probably going to think of like a million different other things, but, you know, whatever. Those are my initial impressions of Danganronpa 2x2. I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I will see you for my next proper video later. Hopefully not that much later. Okay, thanks for listening. I gotta go now. Bye!